Hi, everyone. About 5 minutes till we start our broadcast at the top of the hour. We're looking forward to having everyone here. So just hold on tight. Thanks. If you're just joining us, and while we wait, if you'll open up your questions box, we have a link to a survey that we'd like you to go ahead and open and get ready to answer for us at the end of today's webinar. Again, we'll be starting at the top of the hour. Thanks. Welcome if you're just joining us. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes, but if you're already in the room and can see your questions box, we do have a link to our evaluation survey, and we ask that you go ahead and open that up so you've got that ready to go at the end of today's webinar. Again, we'll be back on in about 2 minutes. Thanks so much. All right, folks. Well, it looks like it's time for us to get started. We like to start on time so we can end on time. I know we'll have some more folks probably joining us as we get going. I'd like to welcome everybody to River Network's Fundraising Essentials for Success series, third webinar, All In, How to Fundraise as a Team. My name is Caroline Bott, and I'm part of River Network's Leadership Development team. My background is in nonprofit administration and fundraising and development, and I'm the former executive director of a small watershed organization in the Highlands of Virginia. Currently, I live on the still snow-covered eastern shore of Virginia near the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. Co-presenting with me today is my colleague and fellow teammate, Paco Ollarvides. Paco, will you please introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Good afternoon from north central Ohio. I'm about an hour south of Lake Erie. Today is 54 degrees, believe it or not, and tomorrow we have a forecast of 4 to 5 inches of snow. So, like Caroline said, I am the Leadership Development Manager in the Great Lakes region. I have been doing this type of capacity building for 15 years, first in Latin America, now in the Great Lakes Basin. I'm happy to see some familiar names in the attendees. Prior to this work, I did lead a coastal research station for Boston University based out of Western Mexico. And we supported numerous projects on wetlands, fisheries, sea turtles, marine mammal work. I'm thrilled to be one of your presenters at this topic is near and dear to me. And I like that saying that teamwork makes the dream work. So let's go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Paco. And also on the webinar with us providing support is our IT specialist, Ryan Carter. So now let's quickly review today's agenda. We're going to begin by talking about the importance of relationships in fundraising. We'll briefly learn about the fundraising cycle, and then we'll explore some of the different roles that your board, staff, and volunteers can play on your fundraising team. We'll talk about how to build your team, best management practices, and end with some of the common fundraising mistakes. After the conclusion of the webinar, Paco and I will stay on the line and answer a few of your questions. Before we dive into our content, though, we need to take a quick pause for some housekeeping. If you're new to the GoToWebinar environment, please note the little orange arrow on your screen. By clicking this, you can collapse or expand your attendees panel. In this panel, I want to call your attention to the questions and handout boxes. There are several resources available for you to download in the handout box, including today's slides. Also, before we go further, I'd like to ask each of you to click on the presentation evaluation link in the questions box. Go ahead and open this survey in a new window. We would be so grateful if you would take 2 minutes at the conclusion of today's webinar to provide your feedback on today's session. Okay, so we like to start off our webinars by getting a sense of who's in the room. So I'm going to ask Paco to go ahead and launch our first poll today.
And I did.
Great. Thank you, Paco. So if you could, and you can choose multiple roles here. I know some organizations have several staff members or volunteers in the room watching together. So feel free to choose multiple identities if others are with you today. Right, and we see a lot of development staff folks in the room with us. That's great. Looks like everybody's almost had a chance to finish up voting. So we'll go ahead, Paco, and close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And can you go ahead and share those results with everybody? Great. So again, looks like a majority of development staff members. We have a few volunteers, which is great. Some board and development committee members, which is wonderful. Glad to have those board members in the room with us today. And some executive directors, and then some other folks. So I'd like to know in the questions box at the end who else is joining us today. Thanks so much for sharing your information there, and we'll go ahead and get started. I like to start with this quote, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." I think it's a great quote by Helen Keller to start us off. If you haven't already, you need to start thinking about fundraising for your organization as a team effort. Concentrating fundraising duties in the hands of just one or a few people can be potentially dangerous to the long-term health of your organization. So your board, staff, volunteers, and sometimes even consultants each play an important role in your development program. Today, we're going to explore those roles and responsibilities and learn about how working together you can achieve so much more. First and foremost, successful fundraising goes hand in hand with building donor relationships. Whether it's a board member, staff, or volunteer building the relationship, the goal is the same: to move a prospective donor from being just interested in your organization to becoming involved and invested. As you think about building those relationships, I want you to keep several things in mind. Fundraising is an opportunity for your donors to invest in the change they want to see in the world. So it's imperative that you spend time learning what motivates your supporters. People don't give to you, they give through you. Remember, people are not giving to your organization because you have needs. They're giving to your organization because of the great work that you do. Remember that every interaction is a donor cultivation opportunity. We'll talk more about cultivation in a minute, but for now, know that every touch you or your volunteers makes with a donor is an opportunity to deepen your organization's relationship with that person. This one's simple, but it's worth saying. In order to raise money, someone from your organization must ask for it. Rarely do people make donations on their own. They're usually responding to a direct mail appeal, a special event, or a personal ask. Think about your organization and who's asking for donations and how are they doing it. In-person asks are almost always the most successful form of appeal. And finally, once you receive a gift of any size, you must thank the donor. It's the #1 golden rule of fundraising. Make sure that you're thanking your donors promptly and letting them know as succinctly as possible what their contribution was used for and how it helps support your mission. Before we talk about your fundraising team, we need to pause to understand the fundraising cycle, which is sometimes referred to as the development or donor cultivation cycle. This cycle helps illustrate the relationship building progression, and it's the underpinning of a successful fundraising program. So the cycle has 4 stages, as you can see here: identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. In the identification stage, you and your volunteers are finding people who may be potential donors and introducing them to your organization. Look at your friends, family, who and where you do your business spends money, your service providers, your church, personal or civic connections. Who around you may have an affinity for the work of your organization? The cultivation stage is where you begin to develop a relationship with a prospective donor. You're taking him or her from no relationship with the organization to one of involvement and investment. During this stage, the donor begins to learn about your organization, and you begin to learn about the donor. Solicitation is the act of asking for a donation, and we're going to cover this in great length in our next month's webinar on making the ask. And finally, stewardship is where you should be thanking your donors and continuing to foster good relations and developing a deeper engagement with them. The purpose of stewardship activities is to keep donors engaged in a donating cycle and encourage them toward regular repeat giving and giving in increasing amounts. The stewardship phase should feed back into your cultivating of your donor for a future ask, although you need to be extremely cautious that stewardship and cultivation phases are not just about preparing to make the asks, rather, they're about deepening your donor's engagement with your organization. As the links of the arrows indicate, you and your team should be spending most of your time cultivating and stewarding your donors. So let's dive a little more deeply into cultivation and stewardship. What are some of the ways that you and your team can cultivate a cold prospect into a warm supporter? You can invite them to a special event or a meeting. Invite them to experience a program, an on-site project. Maybe it's a wade-in or a cruise or a river cleanup. Add them to your mailing list and share newsletters and annual reports with them. Share news via your social media accounts. This is a great way to cultivate many prospects at once. And once they're donors to your organization, how can you steward them into deeper engagement and investment? You should be sending personal thank you notes and making personal thank you calls. Board member thankathons are a great way to do this. A lot of organizations will either give their board members a list of recent gifts and ask that every board member take 5 minutes at the start of the meeting to call a donor and personally thank them for their gift. Makes the board member feel great and certainly makes the donor feel very much appreciated. You should be publicly acknowledging gifts in an annual report. You can invite donors to join a committee. This is a great way to further engage them in your organization. And when you do that, you should be asking your donors why they care about your organization and what they hope to accomplish by being involved. Ask for their opinions as well about your programs, your fundraising activities, and events. There's a saying in fundraising that if you ask for a donation, you get advice. But if you ask for advice, you get a donation. And there's a lot of truth in that statement. So we've talked a little bit about what we want our team to do. Now let's talk about who's going to do this work. Paco?
Yes, thank you. So in most cases, your executive director is the face of your organization. They're the leader of the staff and the bridge to the board, of course. They should be visible to the community, communicate their vision to donor prospects and community members. They should be meeting with donors or prospective donors on a regular and ongoing basis and asking them for donations when appropriate. Even when you have a director of development or a fundraising consultant, the ED is still the chief fundraiser on staff. The director of development then has more of an orchestra leader, making sure that the various strategies that you're using are in tune and they're engaged when appropriate. If you work with an organization that doesn't have an executive director or only very few staff people, which I have seen, um, you should have a discussion with board volunteers and any part-time staff to determine who's doing what to fulfill which duties. Um, and again, in this case, with very few staff, is usually the fundraising task is usually left to the executive director or the board chair. But as Caroline started to allude, this is a collective, collaborative effort. It requires specific skills, and your executive director, as a leader, needs to be intentional. They will delegate, they will differentiate, they will coordinate the tasks that the staff will do, and that the tasks that the board members are asked to help out with. Now, in nonprofit world, we know that type A personalities abound. Type B people have a difficult time making a meaningful contribution. So the executive director should be able to manage those relationships to solicit appropriate feedback. Sometimes fundraising expertise is useful, and it's useful for all staff. But it comes in many ways. It can be some formal training, such as this, or some empirical experience just with the years of doing this. But the coordination of people's different talents and different skill sets is what is very, very critical here. Some people may find it easy to reach out to folks to talk. Others may be inclined to doing homework, finding out specific interests or favorite causes for a prospective donor. So coordinating those interests is important. It's also important to be aware of your volunteer members and their other volunteer needs and interests, but specifically the connections that they are bringing to you. For needs, what I mean is maybe some people like to do dry practices when they're about to do an ask, or maybe they want to have a script with them when they're doing a phone call. Um, Often it is the case that a case statement, a compelling document, will serve as for that purpose. If you haven't never heard of a case statement, it's a short, concise, powerful document, 2 pages to the most, and it conveys a sense of urgency, but at the same time, it helps people answer questions when people are engaged. And in terms of interest, it's good to ask a board member why they joined the organization. What it makes them believe in the organization, and maybe see that passion that can be used to motivate them to approach fundraising. So staff is critical and important in providing information, support. This can be in the form of updates about programs, about projects, particular campaigns. They should be able to provide the board with the tools for them to succeed. For example, knowing how much money a donor has given in the past. That's called their giving history. Let's go to the next slide, please. Unfortunately, many board members aren't aware that they also have fundraising responsibilities, or they may think, as is often the case, that they lack fundraising skills. But we all know that we have selected board members for a variety of reasons, but maybe because of some of the direct responsibilities that they will have helping raise funds. So everyone needs to be involved. Every board member needs to be involved in fundraising. We often say the board member is chosen for three T's: their talent, their time, and treasure. Um, I we can't emphasize enough how their skills and their support will help you secure resources and how critical this is. Um, we have there a question. There's my slide does not advance. I'm not sure. Ryan, you can look at that. Um, so we also often say that board members help open doors, and they are very good at also opening wallets. Uh, Now, I want to touch on personal giving by board members. This is a core responsibility of each of them, and it becomes one of the basic measurements of organizational health. It represents a commitment of every board member to contribute with his or her means to the organization and the causes. And I have been told that foundations often look at this as an indicator when a new organization first approaches them, whether there's 100% fundraising board commitment giving. If a board member doesn't provide regularly, it may suggest that they don't understand what it means to lead by example for the organization, or maybe they don't understand why your organization may need financial support. Some board members uh, may view their commitment of time as a substitute for financial support. But although it's true that volunteer time is critical to any organization, and in many cases this may be the most important support that a board member can give you, dollars and service should not be thought as interchangeable. Mm. Every board member should make, and I'm calling this important here, at least a symbolic contribution to show their commitment to the financial well-being of your organization. After all, if people that are close to your organization don't support it, why should anybody else, right? It just makes sense, and it allows also the board member, when they're asking, to be more effective when they ask about their own commitment. If they're asked, well, have you given, and they say no, it's a very different conversation then. Um, so I already said that the personal significance contribution of at least 100% should always be strived for. And Caroline started to touch on the relationship building. The board is also critical to build the trust of the prospective donor, to ensure that the organization has transparency, consistency. Um, Staff and board should always have the same information about the organization, about the programs, about the processes, on how funds are utilized. That way, there's no misunderstandings. And again, the staff will be updating the board regularly on the progress of the fundraising plan and the strategies that are working or not, to adjust if necessary. We all know that board members have a fiscal and fiduciary responsibility to oversee and monitor progress on an organization, especially as it comes to finances. And so that oversight can come in the form of dashboards. Um, the board also establishes fundraising policies for the organization. They engage in the development, the adoption, and the implementation of a plan. They should ensure the ethical standards of the organization by suggesting or by implementing policies on fundraising. Be aware of particular projects that will lead to mission drift or catch potential conflicts of interest. I've seen time and time a board creating a donor acknowledgement policy, a trigger value where a certain response is sent at $100 is a phone call. Anything above $10 is a thank you note. Different strategies. I also was able to witness a very engaging discussion in a board group that evaluated and approved an endowment strategy. And this was a very productive atmosphere, and I felt very good to be in the entire process. Um, the board members, the information being on top of what the organization is doing goes both ways. They should be inquisitive and ask staff for updates. After all, they're going to be representing, they're going to be your ambassadors to the community. Um, they should have an elevator speech ready at a moment's notice. It's an informal way of articulating what the organization does. And they should be comfortable sharing, why do I care about this organization. Um, they should share the good work of your organization with their friends, with their colleagues, with their acquaintances, and they help, of course, identify prospects or make introductions to the executive director and to staff. Um, the board members evaluate the function of the fundraising committee, the composition, the members in it, the practices, the dynamics, how often they meet, um, for which mechanisms. Um, and like I said, on occasion there may be some points of view, but this should be welcomed as enriching and critical. Um, Board members that you strive to have in your committees for fundraising draw from all points of view, ideas. They're committed to debate, to they're active listeners. They give constructive feedback. They're open to changing their mind or stand behind the decision once it is agreed upon. So um, a board will be ready to support a fundraising plan, which will have milestone events, which will organize in a calendar way, and will have indicators to or benchmarks to strive for. Can we see the next slide, please? So continuing along the lines of board rules, they're helping us cultivate donors, building those relationships. They are inviting donors or prospective donors to events, sending them personalized notes, information. Sometimes board members offer to host house parties. Those go along very well, I think. It's this friendship building. An easy way for a board member or any volunteer to be involved, for that matter, is thanking donors, personal notes, emails, or a phone call just saying how much that support is helping, the great work that you're doing, and again, maintaining and building on those relationships. Um, we mentioned that most board members will spend the time in that cycle and the cultivation and the stewardship, but they, when appropriate or if the occasion fits and makes sense, the board will help in the solicitation. Maybe they have a close connection to that particular donor. They are expected to support and encourage all activities as a team, ensure that the program has the resources and supported the fundraising program. That is, we know it takes money to raise money. So by attending public events, by bringing friends that become prospective donors, those are some of the roles and some of the responsibilities that can be spelled out when a new person joins your team. Other personal traits that I'm looking for when recruiting board members are their connections, their professional connections, the demographics, the stakeholders they represent, whether they work well as a team, they're open-minded, maybe they're patient, they're flexible and unselfish. I see good board members as people that are diligent, that are trustworthy, respectful. I value very much self-awareness, friendliness, uh, uh, board members being good listeners, good communicators. The the fundraising and development involves plenty of negotiation, plenty of compromise, some consensus building, some mediation. So make sure you're having the right people for the right tasks. My recommendation: how to find if these people have these tasks. Um, Give them tests, smaller projects, invite them to events and observe them. Do your due diligence, maybe talk to people that have worked with them in the past. Hey, are these trustworthy, empathetic people? Are they decisive, or are they very, very set in their ways? Are they team players? When it's time to vote whether that person should be invited to the board, everybody should chime in. Staff, people that know them. Um, it should be a consensus that that person is the right fit. And in some cases, I've even seen NGOs, they have a trial period for new board members serving on committees. One thing that people that know me, I am big into board culture, the way things are promoted within the organization. So By modeling collaboration, maybe through a mentor system, new board members can see if they're a right fit for this particular organization. A mentor can also be the best gauge of the best use of the time and talent of that mentee, and it also allows for some cohesion, for understanding of how decisions are made, for introductions to important people, to issues, to projects, and even as a sounding board. So new board members, I've seen they appreciate having a mentor. Let's go to the next slide, please. We having maybe a little bit of a delay, but the next slide is an engagement form. Um, we are showing you this as a non-legally binding but equally as useful tool, and it will be included as one of your handouts that has been referenced earlier. It makes it clear that all board members that are being recruited, fundraising is a priority. Um, you can spell out the expectations in it, the roles, responsibilities that I just mentioned, or you can also have some blank spaces there to learn about particular interests, talents, or dislikes, things that the board member does not wish to do. So we encourage your organization to have some kind of board commitment form. That way, it's the easiest way to engage the entire board, bring it up at the beginning of the year, and institutionalize it as a maybe an annual thing. As you can see on the one on the right, they typically can have a section on where the board member commits to giving an annual gift, but also commits to helping get some kind of financial contribution. And you can get very creative there. The board giving campaign should be led by the board chair, and we should use this tool to maybe strive for 100% giving. A healthy competition doesn't hurt. It promotes not just accountability, but also transparency. So when a board member gives, or when they coordinate a big gift or renews their membership, make sure everybody knows about it, celebrate it. It honors the person, and also adds a little bit of peer pressure for others to step up if they haven't. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, we talked about ideal board members, and some of those board members will naturally gravitate to a development committee. This is a board sanction committee, very, very responsible for the implementation of the approved fundraising plan with its financial goals, with its during the year. The development committee should be chaired by a board member, and have some board members, but it can also have some non-board members in it, be it staff, be it volunteers. I've seen usually them made up by about an average of 5 people, and they meet on a regular basis. Like I said, they develop a fundraising plan. They attend separate committee meetings. I would venture to say at least once a month, and if possible, in person. They report back of their the activities or the progress through dashboards. They complete or make sure that assigned fundraising activities are achieved, that tasks are on time. They identify prospective donors and participate in the cultivation of new ones through events. They solicit donors when appropriate, or they recognize opportunities for people to work or to give to the organization. They may encourage new members to join the organization and eventually become donors. And again, each committee, but specifically the development committee, should have a work plan of itself with its own goals and a budget for that committee. Let's go to the next slide, please. So volunteers, I'm not just talking about now the super volunteers, which are board members and not staff. Other folks, they can also be very useful in your fundraising program. So the benefits of having them, of course, they are sincere, they are passionate. It is very different for one person that is a paid staff to ask for money than if a volunteer that is fundraising. ask for money. They're coming from a different place. They're not being paid, and their approach is very genuine. So they become your best advocates for your cause. A dedicated volunteer. Plus, they also bring their own networks and relationships. So by adding volunteers to your toolkit, your fundraising toolkit, it broadens your own network, the reach that your organization may have. A donor is more likely to trust and support their own friends, and they may be friends with these volunteers. So the likelihood of them giving to them as opposed to you increases. Um, Many people in this webinar may agree that an organization is often short on time or resources to fundraise, and a volunteer can fill that gap. They have time, they have skill, and they may be the answer for what you're looking for, provided, of course, they are supported with training. They can also even bring some skills that your staff may not have. For example, they may be good at business or sales or marketing, and these are all very good skills to have when you're fundraising. So seeing the volunteers of the benefits of volunteers, sorry, uh, how do you find those volunteers? First, you need to figure out the skills that you're looking. What characteristics are you trying to get in your team for a particular project? You're looking for somebody to enter data, or for graphic design, for making a nice appeal letter. Uh, when you think about what void you're trying to fill out, then you think about where do these volunteers come from? Maybe they are already involved in other activities, cleanups uh, within the organization, or maybe they're part of your pool of donors. And if you think about those skills that you need and you have identified them as donors, maybe you invite them to get involved. So, as usual, with all volunteer opportunities, not just fundraising, you should create a list of the tasks that you want them to fulfill. They should be diverse in nature, with different levels of involvement, going from spending 1 hour stuffing envelopes to multi-month commitment in organizing an annual gala. Um, you, you should have volunteer opportunities for various ages, various skill sets, and the feedback that you give to them is critical. Show them how their time, their commitment is helping them move the needle of the organization. That way, again, they see their value. They feel reinvigorated. Finally, if you expect a volunteer to do a certain way things to be successful, well, uh, train them. Fundraising is not natural to most people. Be specific, like if you want them to forward an email to their friends, maybe give them some talking points, give them some sample text. Volunteers, I said, they have time, but they still want to make the best use of their time. So when you give them tasks, make them uh, they are able to achieve them. For example, asking for somebody to do 30 calls in 1 month, as opposed to asking them to do 3 calls. Um, Maybe you just need more volunteers. So spread the workload, and you'll be more successful. So now we're going to go to a poll to learn more about your particular fundraising team. In other words, who is involved in your fundraising efforts currently? And there's the questions. Remember, you can answer more than one. Who's currently doing the fundraising? We're looking at very equal percentages of staff and board, and to a lesser degree, we have volunteers and consultant. Very interesting. Okay. Thank you. Very quick responses here. We're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Caroline, if you could share, please. So as you can see there, great majority of staff involved in fundraising, but not far behind board. So it is a joint effort. It's great. A few of you, a third of you, have a development committee, and a fifth of you do have volunteers, with very, very few having outside consultants. I would say it does involve a healthy mix of all of the above. So thank you for your vote, and we'll go to the next slide.
Great, thanks, Paco. Okay, so Paco mentioned earlier your fundraising plan. As we've said, fundraising is most successful when done as a team, but that doesn't mean that everybody should be responsible for everything. As with any successful team, fundraising requires leadership, and specifically, this is going to come from your executive director and your board chair. But depending on your fundraising strategies that you're employing, sometimes your staff is going to take the lead and the board is going to play the supporting role, such as in a membership solicitation. And in other instances, your board is going to take the lead, whether it's a board giving campaign, and the staff is going to be in the supporting role. This can get confusing if the roles aren't clearly defined and understood. So whether you have a dedicated development director or are an all-volunteer organization, it's important to assign an individual, or where appropriate, individuals accountable for specific tasks when developing your fundraising plan. Your fundraising plan gets everyone within your organization, including your staff, volunteers, and board members, on the same page. And it helps give your team a clear idea of what the expectations of them will be, as well as the anticipated results. Your plan typically organizes all of your fundraising activities over a certain period of time, and generally includes campaign dates and strategies, donor tracking plans, special event details, and targeted communication strategies. If you missed our December webinar on fundraising plans but want to know more, contact either Paco or me, and we can provide you with a link to that recording. Most importantly, as it relates to our webinar today, your fundraising plan identifies who is responsible for which strategy. So as you can see in the example here, oftentimes a strategy may have multiple responsible parties. Here, both the board and staff have roles to play in membership renewals. So Paco spoke about the importance of identifying and clearly defining opportunities for your volunteers, and I just shared with you some of the importance of detailing this information in your fundraising plan. So let's look at some examples of activities. This list of ideas is really just to help you start thinking about the types of roles volunteers can fill on your team. From writing personal notes on appeal letters to making thank you calls, these are all great cultivation and stewardship activities that can help build and deepen relationships with your donors. And I'm starting to see more and more organizations using social media, Facebook posts and tweets to peer fundraise. We'll probably be going into greater detail regarding peer fundraising in our final webinar in March. But before we move on here, I also wanted to point out, as you can see, I've included estimated time commitments for each of these activities. When working with volunteers, it's extremely helpful to define as clearly as possible the task at hand. So if you're recruiting volunteers and you say, hey, I've got a gala committee and I'd like you to serve, they need to know that that's going to be a long-term commitment, as opposed to, hey, can you come in and help me step envelopes for a couple hours this afternoon? Earlier, I showed you an example of a fundraising task, the membership renewals, that was a joint responsibility of both the staff and the board. This chart highlights some of the most common fundraising tasks and who traditionally is best suited to be held accountable. However, your chart may look quite different, especially if you're an all-volunteer organization. The important takeaway here is to make sure, I'm going to say this loud and proud, make sure that you have a lead identified and, if appropriate, a supporting role identified for every fundraising task your organization commits to doing. So every task in your fundraising plan needs to have a lead person or group identified responsible for it. We've talked a little bit about who's responsible for what roles, and now we're going to shift to talk briefly about how to build your fundraising team, who you should ask for help, and how you identify potential team members. Paco gave some great ideas earlier when talking about board members and doing your due diligence, having them serve on committees or help with events and observing them. We recommend another thing that you can do is just start by making a list of people who are already close to your organization. This would be your board members, your committee members, your donors certainly, but think about your other staff too, maybe not just development staff members, volunteers, local business partners, or corporate sponsors. These folks have already showed a connection to your mission, and they've given of their time, talent, and treasure, as Paco said, so they're great candidates for your fundraising team. Write down 5 people you'd like to invite on your team. List their skills and strengths and their connections. Maybe they're a graphic designer, or they own a local outfitter, or they're well connected in the community. But keep in mind that people don't have to be wealthy to be a good fundraising team member. Your list should include a diverse group of people who have different skills and different interests. Reach out to each person on your list and ask their advice. You can ask them questions about your recent fundraising solicitation, an upcoming event, or even what kind of incentives they would appreciate for a donation. Is it a bumper sticker, a hat, or nothing at all? As I said earlier, asking advice is a great way to engage a donor. Let them know that you appreciate their advice, and if you think they would be a strong candidate, ask them to join your team. Just be sure up front that they know that they're actually going to help you be raising money to support the mission of your organization. And remember that there are many tasks to be done in a fundraising program, from identifying, cultivating, asking, and thanking donors to data entry, editing, event planning. The list goes on and on. The key to forming a successful fundraising team is to match those tasks to the individual skills of your volunteers. After you have your team in place, you need to think about best practices. And in order for your team to be successful, you should be transparent about your organization's finances and fundraising goals. This helps to build the community's trust in your organization. You should be sharing a list of your current and past funders in your fundraising plan. See if your team members have any connections. Give each team member their own fundraising toolkit. This may include a binder or a folder with information about your organization's mission, a list of board members and staff members with contacts, descriptions of your projects and programs, copies of the pledge form or donation form, and your case for support that Paco mentioned earlier. There's nothing worse than sending a team member out to meet with a prospective donor and them not being able to answer simple questions about your organization. Provide fundraising training for your volunteers. Educate them on the fundraising cycle, the best practices, and conduct, as Paco said, some role-playing exercises. Ask them to partner up and in 3 minutes say why they care about your organization. Keep your team updated about the progress toward your fundraising goals, and remember that TEAM stands for Together Everyone Achieves More. So be sure to shower your team with appreciation and celebrate all the great work you're accomplishing together. Before we move into our final slide on common fundraising mistakes, I want to reinforce the importance of coordination and managing your fundraising team. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. Clarify who is doing what. Make tasks for volunteers as detailed as possible and assign responsibilities in your fundraising plan. You need to ensure that notes from all your interactions with your donors and your prospects are captured in your database. I know this can be daunting and sounds time-consuming, but the more information you have about your donors and their interactions with your organization, the better chance you have of making a successful ask and deepening their engagement with your organization. Only one solicitation team per prospect. It's very important that, especially with major donors, you identify who will be responsible for their cultivation and stewardship. It's a best practice to assign a specific board member or lead solicitor to every major donor in your database and make sure that you're managing that relationship. For example, helping to set appointments, following up with board members to see how their meeting went, and making notes in your database about anything the board member learned. And finally, determine who's going to do this thank you and follow-up and sending out of promised materials. Typically, this is going to be your development staff person role, but again, if you're an all-volunteer organization, then you'll need to identify who is going to be responsible for the all-important follow-up if a donor has questions. Now, finally, a final word about common fundraising mistakes. Building relationships takes time, and you need to have the right person to make the right ask at the right time for the right amount. Especially with major donors, the larger the gift, the longer it takes. So take it slow and work to build strong relationships with your supporters that will pay dividends in the end. Cold calls are the worst possible place to use the energy and goodwill of your kind-hearted team members because cold calls have the highest rate of failure. So instead, send your volunteers on easy calls that will create fun, shared vision, and passion for your organization. Send them on calls where you already know what the outcome will be. Send them out to make friends for your organization and engage the community with their passion. Remember that every team member brings a unique set of skills and a network of relationships to the table. So it's important to match your fundraising needs with your volunteer skills and to plan carefully the best use of their time in order to make the most of their valuable contacts and limited availability. Use your team members strategically when you need them the most and where they'll do the most good. And it may be true that every crisis is an opportunity, but all too often organizations wait until a crisis to mobilize their fundraising team. And then the conversation really becomes all about the money rather than the great work you're trying to do. Have you ever been part of an organization that asks board members to pool money quickly, to respond to a budget shortfall, or to cover some major financial loss? This sets the board up for an unpleasant fundraising experience. And finally, your team needs to have a solid understanding of the underlying philosophy of fundraising. That is to develop donors, investors, and partners who will stick with your organization for the long run. And they need to know how to talk about your organization. So be sure to give them the tools and the training they need to be successful.
Okay, we're gonna recap, but I was following up some of the questions that came up. Tricia had one on dashboards. I particularly, and a lot of people now respond very well with graphics, and so you can think of like a speed gauge on a car with numbers and or a bar graph showing a specific money amount goal, and another bar just updating on the progress where you are, whether you're within speed limit or within the particular percentage you want to reach. Right outside my house, there's like a United Way. They have this picture of a thermometer with the goal amount that they want to raise at the very top, and the thermometer is being filled up with donations. And so you just choose the indicators there that you want new members or corporate donations or contributions. So that's what I meant by dashboards. Again, for recap, we talked about the importance of establishing, maintaining relationships. This is a long process. It involves many touch points. Many people should be involved with one primary lead, of course, to coordinate it. We talked about the fundraising cycle, the various areas where volunteers, board, and staff can be involved. The duration, the length of those arrows, meaning how much time you spend on it. I specifically talked about different roles that each of these people may have. Caroline spoke about simple steps to build your fundraising team, and she just mentioned a few common fundraising mistakes. We want to hear from you. We're continuing to monitor questions, and when we finish this webinar, we will stay a few more minutes if people want to type in their questions. We'll go to the next slide, please. We want to make you aware of resources that are valuable online for you. They're out there. You will receive an additional email with some PDFs of documents produced by River Network following this webinar. And then we have our final poll, please, Caroline. We have been talking about adjusting our webinar to your specific needs. So people have been giving us feedback, but we do still want to know for our final webinar what you wish for us to focus. These are some of the suggestions. So please select one or more than one if you're interested. We have a few responses. Okay. Okay, I think if you're engaged and not multitasking in this webinar, you've had enough time to answer for this. We'll close the poll. Thank you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So the majority are interested in memberships and sustained giving programs. Half of you voting on that. With collaborative fundraising and crowdfunding, similar percentages. Planned giving programs, not as high interest. Thank you. Okay. We'll take note of that. Thank you again for your engagement, and we will send you an agenda of that webinar in the weeks to come. We have provided an organizational action plan. It's in your handout panel too. You can download it. It will be sent on MailChimp email. We encourage you to be an active participant in this webinar. So when you're thinking about ways that you can use this information, you can jot it down in this simple page. It's a to-do task list. Following each session, you have spaces there. Maybe it's as simple as talk to my board chair about X activity, or institutionalizing more regular meetings, or something even more complicated as updating our entire case statement. Let's go to the next slide. Um, just a reminder, this is a sequential of a 5-part webinar series that River Network's leadership development team has produced. Um, our supervisor is Diana Toledo. Caroline and I are both members of it. And this webinar is free to current due-paying River Network members. If you're not a River Network member, or if you want to check on your membership status, please double check with Victoria Yu if you have any questions. And earlier it was asked if this webinar and all of our webinars are available, the recordings and the slides, but it's not easy to get to them through the webpage. So reach out to us. We will provide you with a link that will send you to the registration page, but it should be easy to retrieve from there. Next slide, please. We regularly provide a lot of one-on-one consulting services to your organization at a very discounted rate for members. And we help with specific fundraising tasks like developing plans, creating major donor strategies, reviewing member programs. This webinar is an example of our efforts to increase your fundraising overall capacity. And if you identified some things today that need work on, feel free to reach out to us. We can help. Maybe by geography, maybe by your particular inclination. We are here to help you. And next slide, please. So thank you for listening to us. Remember, you had a window open with the survey that really helps us to improve. And we do have our annual conference, River Rally, coming up at the end of April. So make sure registration is open. Make sure to click on that. And again, Caroline and I will be monitoring some questions and stay past, but this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'd like to thank everybody as well, and I'll go ahead and start answering some of the questions that I've seen coming in. To follow up on the question asked about dashboards, if you weren't able to attend our webinar on the fundraising plan, we actually dove a little deep into dashboards in that presentation, so I'd be happy, Tricia, to send you that link to that webinar, and you can get some more information about dashboards there. Eric asked a question about case statements. Again, we went into depth on those when talking about our fundraising plan, but just briefly, again, your case statement tells donors who your organization is, what it's accomplished in the past, and outlines your vision for the future. It basically tells donors why your organization's vision matters and why your donors should care, and gives them a chance to get involved and make an investment in your organization. It's usually a 3 to 5 page document that is developed in coordination with your board, your development committee, and your development staff. And it's a great piece to have on hand. Everybody involved on your fundraising team should have a copy of that. Questions coming in again about the access to the reporting. Yes, I believe you'll receive 2 emails from us. The first will be an automated email from GoToWebinar, which I believe does include the link to today's recording. And before you leave the room today, again, if you expand your handout box in your attendees panel, there are 4 handouts available for you to download today, including today's slide deck as a PDF. So go ahead and grab that there. Those handouts will also be included in a separate email that will come directly from our staff to you in a MailChimp email, and you'll probably receive that later this afternoon or tomorrow. Let's see, send me the links. Let's see. Yes, we do have an example of a case statement document, Eric, and I will try to follow up with you and send that to you directly. Thanks for the great questions. We'll stick on the line for just a couple more minutes. Looks like we still have a good number of folks still on the line. So please go ahead and send your questions. And please do take the time to fill out our evaluation. We'd like to know if you're finding these webinars beneficial, and if so, what's most beneficial, and if not, what can we do to better meet your needs? Like lots of people want a copy of that case statement document. Happy to send that out. If you'll be patient, I probably won't get those emails out to you until the 1st of next week. But I will definitely make note of everybody who would like a copy of that.
And Caroline, you mentioned on the case statement being 3 to 5 pages. I've seen it on 1 to 2 also. So it's really organization-wise how much detail you put into that document. And I actually cannot offer a copy because most of it is an internal document. But I'm glad you have an example. So just so that we all know, this is something that you keep. That it's kind of like I call it your cheat sheet.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. Still have about 30 or more people, about half the people still on the line. So if there's any other questions we can answer, we've got just a couple minutes left and happy to answer questions for you.
Dana puts there that they produce an external case statement and they use the 1-pager. Do people really read those? I would say they would read it more than if you don't provide anything for them. So if you go to make a particular acquaintance, so the board member has those documents with them, and somebody says, "Tell me more," it is a good practice to have it if you want to share it. Sometimes people don't have the case statement, but they have a brochure.
We have a question about the weather in Denver. So, Sharon, neither Paco nor I have the pleasure of living in Denver. I don't know what it's like there today. I do see a question about donor burnout from Nanette. And that's an interesting question. And I think, yeah, there is certainly a lot of donor fatigue. One thing I would recommend is, again, asking your donors, what's too many touches for them? A lot of times you can send a survey out to your donors and, again, begin with appreciating them and thanking them for all that they do to help you with your organization. But, then turn the tables on them and say, we really want to be responsive to you. How would you like us to communicate with you, and how often would you like us to communicate with you? It's a tough thing, and I don't know, Paco, if you have any ideas about donor burnout. The personal touch, as you said, Nanette, certainly the more personal the touch, I don't think anybody ever tires of getting a phone call just to hear somebody say thank you and ask them why they care about the organization, but don't ask for anything else. I don't think anybody could tire of that. So certainly I agree. The more personal your touches can be, the better response and retention rate you'll have.
I would say just widening your net so that you're not targeting the same people all the time. So asking them for contacts, asking them for acquaintances. Do you know of other people? They may not even be in your watershed, but they may be interested in your program, or they may be interested in some of the causes that that particular donor is inclined to help out with. So widening the net, I would say.
Yeah, and Nanette, too, another thing, I'll go back to our last webinar when we did talk about donor retention rates. And so, that really ought to be factored into your fundraising plan as well, because it's the easiest money to make, somebody who's already shown a commitment to your organization. I get it, you don't want to burn them out, but you should definitely be, and I'm glad you are, paying close attention to watching out and making sure you're retaining them, but not without burning them out for sure. Let's see. People are uncertain now about the new tax laws, no longer allowing some donor deductions to nonprofits. I've seen a number of different emails come across from some of the fundraising gurus that I tend to follow about the new tax laws. I don't think I'm prepared to speak to any of that at this point in time. I think people are still kind of waiting to see how things are all going to settle. But it's something we're definitely keeping an eye on, and I think is worth us maybe putting together a piece for our organizations to have. So I will definitely add that to a list of things that we can maybe follow up with you on.
Dana has a good question about using portfolio with thumbnails for people to choose different projects. Yes, I've seen that, and it is creative. That is an option, definitely. Another one would be for you to kind of like say which are the projects that you have highest priorities or highest urgency. So there's a right balance of the donor's interests and your needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add to that too, Dana, my one word of caution, I think it's great it's a great way to find out what programs your donors are interested in. If they take off, yeah, I really want to help with the water monitoring program, so then you can start trying to engage them more specifically to that program. But be careful when you do your solicitations. If you are offering different programs or projects, whether or not, be careful to make sure whether or not you're soliciting an unrestricted or a restricted gift. If your donor hands you a $500 check and says, I want this to be used for the monitoring program, then you're obligated to use that money as such. And so you need to be careful in your wording of solicitations. If you are suggesting programs to which they could support and your organization has the ability to make the final decision, or if you're actually allowing them to specifically support a program, then you need to make sure you're tracking that money accordingly. More questions. How often should the development director meet with the board individually, and should new directors schedule one-on-ones with board to meet with the ED first? And should new directors ED first? I think that, Karen, your question about the director of development's interaction with the board of directors, I think that varies by organization. I've been a part of organizations where, as the director of development, I've provided a report to our board and I attend their monthly board meetings. We had a new executive director come in. They didn't like that format, and so the lead program staff, we were no longer a part of the board meetings, and it just varies by organization. I'm not sure I can say what the best practice is per se, because I think it's truly specific to an organization, but I'd be happy to talk with you more about your particular organization and what's working and what's not, and give you some ideas of things that may work for you all.
Yeah, I would echo that. It really depends on the relationship that the executive director has, but having a director of development is a good problem to have. The more people that are updating the board on progress and stuff is great for the ED to be able to continue being the leader. So it is really up to the organization dynamics, and the more times you connect with the board members within their own means is the better.
Great. Well, Paco, I think it looks like our questions have slowed and our time has come to an end. So I want to thank everybody who's still on the line with us again for joining us today. I hope we answered all the questions that came through, but please feel free to reach out to Paco, Deanna, or myself, your leadership development team members. We're happy to answer any questions, provide materials, and follow up. And again, hope to see you on February 1st at our next webinar, Making the Ask. So everybody take care, stay warm if you're in one of these crazy climates where it's 50 degrees and snowing, and we hope to see you in February. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.